like to thank Kojo Damptey for taking the time from his election campaign to come on the podcast. We know in the middle of a campaign, every minute counts, every footstep matters, and every door knocked is a potential vote. So we very much appreciate you taking your time to join us today to talk about what happened last week. I'm going to say. So, Mr. Damptey, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
No problem. Thanks for the invitation.
Um, this isn't a pleasant conversation to have, but maybe set the tone for our listeners. Maybe explain to us what you were doing, what you were thinking when you got the word that your bus shelter ad was vandalized by white supremacist literature.
Yeah, so it was Monday. I was with some family and friends, so I think my campaign team couldn't get a hold of me. However, once the bus ad went up, I think it went up in the middle of September. Our campaign team, knew that something would happen. So every day we have somebody drive by just to make sure everything is okay. There's nothing wrong with it. So one of our campaign members was driving by and saw that there was a white and black and white poster on it. So she decided to get closer to it. When she got there, she saw obviously the message that was on there, and yeah, took some pictures, sent it to uh, all of us. I didn't get it because I was with family and friends, and she decided to take it down. And then when I then got the messages, everyone was like, "Do you know what happened to the bastard?" I'm like, "I don't know what happened." So let me go and take a look. So I went to take a look, saw the pictures, and then there was some leftover pieces. So my partner and I decided to clean it off, and then I made a video about the incident.
Now, so our listeners are completely caught up. The CBC is reporting that Hamilton Police is treating this as a potential hate crime and are investigating it as such, and that similar like-minded posters have been appearing around Hamilton, and even as far as Brantford, apparently, with the similar messaging. So, I guess in your experience, in your capabilities as the former executive director of the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, do you think that this is a targeted campaign against you for being a Black man running for city council, that you're being specifically targeted by hate groups or white supremacist groups to get you to drop out or to defeat you?
Yes, but it's also a message to other racialized candidates, right? I think about Ahona Medi, who's running as a public trustee for Wards 8 and 14, Sabrina Dahab, public trustee in Ward 2, and other racialized candidates, uh, candidate Narendra Nan in Ward 3, right? Like there's a strategic plan for folks who are putting up these posters to engage in intimidation tactics to not get racialized candidates to run, and particularly racialized candidates that speak out against white supremacy and that challenge some of the anti-woke rhetoric that we are seeing not only here in Hamilton but across the country. So I think it's not just about, yes, me being a Black man, but it's also towards racialized candidates, indigenous folks, trans folks, queer folks, right?
We've had, I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, we've just had, two really depressing stories. I mean, this is the second one. The first really depressing story was what's going on in Oakville with the basically kind of blockading of Oakfield Trafalgar School by so-called, I mean, I don't even want to call them the so-called freedom people, whatever. I mean, again, it's all, like you say, it's part of this sort of so-called anti-woke agenda, which seems to me to be anti-human agenda, but anyway, whatever. You know, this seems to be on the rise across the country, across the Western world. What, I mean, is there anything you can kind of point to that's triggered this? I mean, and I'm not claiming for a minute that everything was sweetness and light before. We know it wasn't, but the kind of sheer boldness with which people are being vile to people such as yourself, who are just, you know, running for public office, for goodness sake, you know, who have the courage to stand up and say you'd like to contribute to your city. What on earth is behind all this?
Well, let me. That's a loaded question right there.
Okay.
But let me. What I would say is that, you know, the history of this country has. We can start with the Indian Act, right? We can start with internment camps, Chinese internment camps, Japanese internment camps, right? So for a long time, residential schools, right? For a long time, these are things that the general public do not know about. But then people from those communities know about these grotesque acts of systemic racism, right? We can talk about Africville. Here in Hamilton, the KKK used to march down James Street, right? There's also a story about KKK members traveling from Hamilton to Oakville because there was a white woman that was getting married to an indigenous black man, and the chief of police at the time led the charge of Hamilton residents to go into Oakville. So I think people do not know this history, but people that have been affected, Black community members, indigenous community members, other racialized members, know about these histories. So when we're talking about it now, there seems to be pushback from white folks to say that, hey, why are you talking about these things? Why are these things important, right? I don't see any color. But if you didn't see any color, why was it that the last residential school was closed in 1997? If you didn't see any color, why is it that only indigenous children were put in unmarked graves? If you didn't see any color, why is it that our police force had to apologize because they couldn't keep folks from the 2S LGBTQIA plus community safe in 2019 at Pride, right? So that is what we are talking about. And the white supremacists, by the way, we have a white supremacist running as mayor, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we let all of these things happen, but then we convince ourselves that, oh, there's no racism, we're a tolerant society, Canada is multicultural, right? We are not like the States, but we have our own issues. So I think those are the things that are now being brought to bear. And now you have racialized candidates running. You have racialized women running. And let's be clear, the history of Canada, in fact, only white men who own property used to run for office, right?
Absolutely, right. Yeah.
So now when you see racialized folks running, indigenous folks running, Muslim folks running, queer folks running, the backlash is what we are seeing. And that is the sentiments that we are seeing here in Hamilton and across Ontario and in BC. There are elections happening in BC as well. So these are the things that we are seeing. So the idea that racism doesn't exist is totally preposterous.
You touched upon a lot there, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that there is an avowed white supremacist and neo-Nazi running for mayor in Hamilton. Because it's a good segue into the next point is that I've always found that in Canada, our racism is hidden behind that mask of politeness, right? It's a topic we don't want to bring up in polite conversation because it, might offend somebody. So rather than address the injustice of racism or prejudice that does exist in a systematic way, we politely don't acknowledge it. And I was thinking of the fact that Cable 14 on their mayoral debate allowed this person to speak as if they were an equal say, right? It's that politeness of they're just, it's the political process. And you say, well, no, this person literally does not speak for all, does not want to speak for all of Hamiltonians. And so this is a long preamble, and my thoughts are to you, like, how does this motivate you in your campaign? What was it that kind of, is it that politeness that we need to challenge, that we need to start lifting the veil of Canadian society and show the realities of this is like the systemic natures of the injustices that exist in our society? And, is this part of your campaign that you want to fuel and to bring to Hamilton?
Yeah, I think so, but it's a larger context though. So I agree with you. Cable 14 definitely erred in allowing that so-called individual to say what they had to say. And by the way, that so-called person lives in Ward 14, right? So when so when you allow somebody 2 minutes to say what they have to say, even if you are like, oh, it's just a minority of folks, political space allows people to organize. And that's the thing that's been happening. Maxime Bernier and all of these folks are using the political platform they have to talk about these things so that now it becomes mainstream. That is their point, right? So for us, we have to start saying, no, we shouldn't allow this gentleman to talk. If he wants to take it to the Supreme Court, let him do that, right? But when we allow him to talk, now they have space. Now they rally their people. They use their dog whistles. And then we see what happens at a bus shelter, right? And the other thing that Canadians need to pay attention to is most people engage in anti-Black racism and white supremacy in coded ways. I'll give you a specific example. So Scott Radley, commentator with the Spec, wrote an article, and in the article, he had a conversation with the former mayor of Hamilton, Larry Diani. And in the article, it said, the barbarians are at the gate. These candidates that are running now are barbarians at the gate. So let's decipher this. You have racialized candidates running. You have women running, both which are white and racialized, and you are calling them barbarians. So, to me, we let that slide. And I had to literally call the editor at the Spec to say, look, you cannot allow this to go on, right? So we let that slide. It's in a paper. People are reading about this. Then this incident happens, and the former mayor, Larry Diliani, asked, and I'm using these specific examples to show how we get to this point, right? He then asked, what's the source of this poster? Insinuating that maybe I or somebody from my campaign put this thing up. So we let that slide. And then now we are all asking ourselves, how did it come to this? Because these are the little incidents of anti-Black racism and white supremacy, because this Black man what does he know about running for office? Meanwhile, everybody that runs for office is not born a politician.
Well, and here's another thing. So, to any white supremacists listening, A, go to hell. B, we probably wouldn't have interviewed Kojo Damptey. Otherwise, we can't interview every candidate in every race across the 905 region. But you made this a story. And I'm looking at Kojo Damptey's website, and it's like, my God, you've got a hell of a resume. And I know the kind of different resumes that candidates for office have when they run for municipalities. A lot of people don't have much of a resume, and very often it doesn't go much beyond, I was born here or I lived here. And isn't that a strange thing, how often people say, I was born here in campaign literature? You weren't, but you've lived here for a hell of a long time. You've lived here a lot longer than I have, both in this country and in this city. Given that they were trying to shut you down, let's give you an opportunity to say exactly what your resume is and what makes you qualified, a good candidate for a councillor in Hamilton.
Well, before I do that, I also want your listeners to understand that sometimes anti-Black racism and white supremacy can look in the most subtle ways. And I'll give another example, and I'll try and tie it into why I think I'm qualified. So there's another candidate running in Ward 14, and I'll name names now because at this point, what it is. Don Ross, in his platform, he talks about restructuring the public board of health. Hamilton's board of health is made up of all councillors and the mayor. What he forgot to mention was that it was Black doctors, white doctors, and community organizations like the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, and Indigenous community members that came together to say, hey, we just went through a pandemic and our board of health is made up of councillors and the mayor. It is time to restructure it to include healthcare experts and community experts like they do in Toronto and in Ottawa. Now, why do I mention that? He forgot to reference that, but he puts it in his platform. And to me, that says, so we did all the work. We did all the advocating. Sometimes there were certain councillors that even totally dismissed us. And I'm going to tell the story. Councillor Ferguson, when doctors and nurses were delegating, he said, and I quote, "These people want to take over our board of health." Think about that for a second. When we are here trying to innovate our public health system that has crumbled down, that's what Councillor Ferguson is thinking about. And then Don Ross, a candidate who didn't show up when we're talking about these issues, now puts it in his platform and he's running on it. And that is what I call anti-Black racism. And that is why we have people like From and these posters going around. We have public trustees, Becky Buck. We had 4 trustees that were found to be racist, but they are still running. And this is the issue that we are talking about. So why am I qualified? Because we've done the work. We've shown up for community. We've faced threatening emails. We faced despicable acts of racism, emails, voicemails. Some candidates have been told to die, to choke to death. But we are still here because we believe in the dignity of everyone. We want everyone to have a place in this city. We want a just world. We want a community that is full of compassion, that's full of love, that's full of cooperation. Those are the things that we are fighting for. We are not fighting for exclusion. We are fighting for inclusion so that we can all thrive here in Hamilton.
You touched upon a lot there, and I don't necessarily want to look at the past. I'd like to maybe start looking towards the future, because one of the previous things we had on a previous episode was Roll and I were talking about the number of activists that are seemingly running in this year's election. Yourself will be included in that list. I'm curious to see if that change does happen, because we're talking activists, not just in terms of anti-racism activism, but LGBTQ plus activism, environmental activism, accessibility activism. How do you vision working with those individuals, and where do you see the potential for intersectionality to really impact public policy at the city of Hamilton? How do you envision that potential council working?
So, one of the things I say is we are community leaders, we are community organizers, right? Like to organize a community meeting, I'll give you one example. So there's a document called the Just Recovery Hamilton document. That was 11 non-for-profits that we had to work together to come up with 9 different priorities and connect them together to submit to the city. So you're working with housing groups, you're working with disability activist groups, you're working with feminist groups, YWCA, Sasha Hamilton. We work with everyone to come up with a document that speaks to how do we create a just world, a just Hamilton. So that's an example of some of the things that we're supposed to do. When we talk about climate change, how does it affect public health, right? When we talk about disability justice, how do we ensure our sidewalks are AODA compliant? I'm speaking to seniors that live in Ward 14, and they are concerned about snow removal. They are 80 and 90 years old. How are they going to clear the snow?
Yeah.
Right? You have 70-year-olds that are living on fixed income, but yet their property taxes keep increasing every year. How do we address that? So all of these things are connected, and we just want to have fruitful conversations, critical conversations of how we serve our community. That is it. In Hamilton, the previous councillors, you've been there 30 years since 1988, 20 years, 19 years, and yet we are not seeing a responsive council. And those are the things that we want to change.
Just throw something else into the mix. One of the candidates, it was actually Keenan Loomis, said this morning, it was something that made me raise an eyebrow. And we've been critical of all the mayoral candidates at various points, and just to prove that, I'm going to be critical of Keenan Loomis right now, but that we've certainly said things about Andrea Horvath, and we've definitely said things about Bob Bratina. And he said that the city of Hamilton shouldn't be shouldn't have an affordable housing, shouldn't be providing affordable housing. They should just take the money that they spend on that, which is $51 million a year, which actually seemed like quite a small amount of money to me, and just give that to a non-profit and let a non-profit do that instead. What would your reaction be to that kind of idea?
So I'll give you an example. So that's 51 million. So from 2011 to 2021, the Hamilton police budget increased by 50 million. I just want you to look at that comparison right there, right? So to answer your question, as somebody that used to be an executive director of a non-for-profit, the non-for-profit is severely under-resourced. So if you think the non-for-profit industry can take on addressing a housing crisis, here in Hamilton, we have people on a wait list reaching 7,000. You better think hard. This is what we are talking about. First, that proposition should not take place. We need to invest in city housing. we need to make sure that the units, there are units that haven't been renovated, haven't been refurbished. Those are things that we should be doing. When we talk about providing housing for people, those are the things that we should be doing. Land trust, in making sure that public land that the city owns, we build transitional housing, social housing, rent geared to income housing, market rate housing. Those are things that we should be doing. And so I would have to disagree with candidate Loomis' position that definitely this is something that we don't want to do. Are there non-for-profit organizations that are building houses in Dwell, for example? Yes, let's support them. Let's see how we can fast track some of the developments that they want to do. We should definitely do that. But to say that we have to get rid of city housing, I think that's preposterous.
Yeah, and I'm going to just be completely honest right here. That was my reaction too, and it felt to me like that. I'm sorry. Excuse me a second. Someone forgot to turn his phone off before he came on here. Apologies, but it struck me as that, which what I call conservative. And by conservative, it can be centre right to right, whatever. Of the government's bad at everything, so we should try and minimise the things that the government does. And it's like, if you're running for office at any level of government, that's not what I want to be hearing from you. So yeah, that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. My personal opinion, for what it's worth. So I mean, there's a couple of weeks left in this election. I mean, do you hope that this is the last you're going to see of this kind of vile behavior from the public? Do you think this is? I mean, the most depressing thing you said right at the start, and I didn't comment on it, was that you were expecting this. You were almost waiting for this to happen, and it happened. Yeah, I mean, are you expecting more?
Yes. If I get the opportunity to serve as Ward 14 councillor, you best believe there'll be more attacks. If Ahona Medi, Sabrina, Narendra, and others win, you best believe there'll be more attacks. And I wanted to share this article with you, and I can share. I'll send both of you the link after we are done. And I just want this article. This is written by a teacher, by the way. We don't know which teacher, but it speaks to the anti-woke sentiment that we are seeing. And I wanted to read you a section of it to show you how dangerous our times are going to be in the next couple of years. It says, and I quote, "Unfortunately, nothing within the confines of critical race theory is truth. Racism in both Canada and the US is at all-time lows." I wonder how they measure that, but that's neither here nor there. "Nearly every Canadian believes that the best person should get a job or be admitted to a post-secondary education. Critical race practitioners would have you believe that a racialized student who makes bad choices is living in some kind of apartheid regime where racialized people can't vote, own property, or attend secondary institutions." That is written by a teacher who is teaching our kids. Our kids. So if you think racialized students and even white students are safe in public education, we need to be careful. We need to be careful. To have a teacher say racism is at all-time low, I want to know how they came to that conclusion.
Especially when even in Canada, the Canadian anti-hate website has been saying that. I can't say about anti-Black racism, but definitely anti-Semitism has been on the rise across the country. So I find that if you're an anti-Semite, chances are you're also just an anti-Black racist. probably a homophobe as well. But that's neither here nor there. But that comment got me thinking. What you just said. Clearly, you're not going to convince the white supremacists to vote for you in this election. But circling back to my previous comment about the politeness of Canadian society and the fact that we don't really want to talk about racism in polite society. What do you say to the moderate, the person who knows? Well, that's not. I'm not a racist. I don't subscribe to white supremacist views, but I just don't want to deal with that topic. If we just ignore it, it'll go away. And especially in this election, when it's clear racism and racists exist in this city, in Hamilton, they want power in this city. What do you say to that moderate, that polite Canadian who wants to, who thinks if we ignore it, it'll go away? What do you have to say to them on this election?
I say let's build a city where we care for each other. That has been our mantra since we announced on May 2nd. We've had conversations with so many people. Some people say, I disagree with some of the things you have in your platform, but I can tell you care about the plight of all Hamiltonians. And I think that's where we want to get to. Our identities inform how we look at the world. And that's a good thing. But we have to talk about how they overlap, right? A white man who has lived in poverty, their experience is different from a black man who has lived in poverty. There might be some things that we can connect on. Maybe, for dinner, we used to have craft dinner, right? That's the things that bring us together. But then it still looks different because if we both enter a predominantly white space, the white person might get some preferential treatment. And it happens to me as well. When I go in a space with racialized women, people might give me some preferential treatment because I'm a man, right? So I think those are the conversations that we want to have. And we have to be bold. We have to be vulnerable. We have to know we're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. People think I do not make mistakes. I make mistakes. I've been called out on some of my language that I've used, and it's okay. This is not policing what you can't say or cannot say. It's just making sure that we are in tune with people's experiences and where they are coming from. And it takes a lot, but we have to be committed to build that actual inclusive world that we all want to see. Because at the end of the day, who is against building a safe world for everybody?
Good point to have. I only have one last question to ask you. After going through your history, your platform, and your experiences so far, regardless of what happens during this election, are you going away? Are you going off into the sunset? Or regardless of what happens after the election, what's Kojo Damptey's plans for the future?
There's an African philosophy that says always stay in the present so that you don't miss what's in front of you. So for now, up until October 24th, it's just focusing on this election and doing the things to make sure that we are successful after the polls close at 8 p.m. And then we'll take it from there. You have to bring me back onto the show to find out.
A part 2 episode, okay.
Well, I think we look forward to doing that, and I'm happy to say that regardless of what happens in this election, we'd love to speak to you again. As we wish every candidate who comes onto this podcast, indeed everybody, well, with certainly one exception, we wish everybody who runs for public office well. We wish you well in the election and all the best with the rest of your campaign for a peaceful and harmonious one, and certainly that Hamiltonians are open-minded and accepting enough to get beyond the prejudices that certainly people who look like me are surrounded with as we grow up, and that we have to consciously overcome sometimes. Thank you so much, Kojo Damptey, for joining us, and all the very best in the weeks ahead.
Thank you very much, and also thank you for doing this podcast. I think there are lots of folks across Hamilton that listen. I'm one of those, so please keep on doing this, and thank you for your time and effort.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.